legislation. As opposition MPs, they expect us to improve flawed legislation. And that is what we, as Conservative members of Parliament, will do. Regardless of the outcome of this motion, we will do what we can do to protect Canadians, to support our creators, to ensure that Canadian creators are able to succeed at home and around the globe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to resuming after question period.
Thank the member for the intervention. Of course, we're still on first round, so there's still an unlimited amount of time on that one as well. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Cape Breton-Canso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in the House today to commemorate William Davis Miners' Memorial Day, which is observed every year on June 11th in mining communities across Nova Scotia. In the spring of 1925, coal miners in Cape Breton went on strike to protest poor working conditions and wages. In response to that strike, the community's access to food, water, and electricity was cut off by the company of the day. On June 11th, hundreds of brave coal miners took action to restore those essential needs to the community. Unfortunately, 37-year-old William Davis was shot and killed, making the ultimate sacrifice so that those in the community could have a better life. Mr. Speaker, on Davis Day, mining communities take time to remember William Davis and those who have been lost in mining accidents in mines such as Westray, Spring Hill, Inverness, number 26 Colliery in Glace Bay, and like my grandfather, Billy Kellaway, who was killed in 20 Colliery in Glace Bay. In my riding of Cape Breton-Canso, Mr. Speaker, and across Nova Scotia, this day serves as a reminder of the determination and the sacrifice, the bravery, the leadership, and the resiliency of miners and their families everywhere. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was very proud to sponsor the Canadian Cancer Society's Lotbinière Relay for Life tomorrow in Saint-Apollinaire. It's a symbol of perseverance and a message of hope for people living with cancer and affected by the disease. It's been going on since 1999, and the funds will be used to support innovative research projects on all types of cancer. They will provide a broader support network to help people. It will also help to design better public health systems and offer reliable information on cancer. I would invite you to come walk with me, at the Lotbinière Relay for Life. Thank you very much.
Well represented in the chamber today with these statements by members. The honourable member for Halifax West.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je me lève.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
A wonderful group in my riding, the Beachville Walkettes, for their commitment to supporting the health and wellness of seniors of all residents in the community. This group was started by Beachville resident Paula Blackmore to lead regular neighborhood walks and encourage folks to get some exercise, socialize across generations, tell jokes, and check up on their neighbors. In this way, they're continuing encountering social isolation and supporting their older friends and neighbors to age in place with a greater sense of security and support. Mr. Speaker, our government recognizes the value of helping seniors age well at home. And that's why on Wednesday I was so happy when I heard the Minister of Seniors launch the Age Well at Home initiative to support the community organizations that provide the services seniors need to enjoy their golden years at home. I encourage all organizations to consider applying for this program, and I want to thank everyone working to ensure our seniors feel safe, valued, and supported in our communities. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks a lot.
All right. The honourable député Alfred Pellin.
Mr. Speaker, the parliamentary session is almost over. So I'd like to offer an overview of a period full of progress for my constituents in Alfred Pellin. In this House, there have been 165 speeches, 136 votes, 8 bills adopted, and there are tangible results in Alfred Pellin. Dozens of jobs, or hundreds of jobs rather, for youth, with dozens of businesses, more than $1.2 million for Canada Summer Jobs, tens of thousands of dollars for seniors through New Horizons, $11.3 million for affordable housing, and festivals, community cleanups, walks to support medical research, support for health workers, essential workers, businesses, and farmers. It's a long list, but my time is almost up, so I would like to wish all my constituents an excellent summer.
The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Across Canada, many are losing loved ones to the toxic drug overdose. Last month, I met with service providers from across my riding. We discussed a health-based approach to substance use and Bill C-216 from the Courtney Alberni MP, which was sadly voted down by many Liberals and the Conservatives. Their feedback was clear. Rural and remote communities have very specific challenges. Lack of access to basic health services compounded by a lack of access for supports for family and people struggling with substance abuse. A lack of affordable housing and often no supportive housing, putting stabilized people at risk to returning to the streets where it is impossible for them to stay clean. Lack of supports for families struggling to support their loved ones with addictions, and the stigma which silences and stops addicts and their loved ones from getting access to the help they need. I want to thank the many organizations that came to speak with me on that day, and I am so grateful for your dedication to saving the lives of Canadians. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw the attention of this House to the inauguration of the BAPS Swaminarayan Research Institute on the premises of BAPS Hindu Mandir in Toronto last weekend. The June 4th inauguration marks the centenary celebrations of His Holiness Pramukh Swami Maharaj, creator of this famous Hindu Mandir. Under the spiritual leadership of His Holiness Mahant Swami Maharaj and guided by his message of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, meaning the entire world is my family. This research institute is dedicated to advancing quality research, learning and expression of Hindu heritage, its philosophies and denominations, affiliated languages, cultures, and rich collection of literature. As the Institute pursues excellence in research, I'm hopeful that we will see the flourishing of values such as peace, love, and harmony that are central to Hindu practice and tradition. We are proud of the achievements of the Hindu community here in Canada and for the success that has enabled them to grow their work through the creation of this institute as begins its works. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Brampton North.
Mr. Speaker, today marks the end of the 10 days of terror endured by the Sikh community from June 1st to the 10th in 1984. I still remember as a young child seeing the pain and grief of my parents as they learned of the Indian government's invasion of the holy site of Darbar Sahib, known as the Golden Temple. As thousands of people gathered to pray, the military hit with heavy artillery, machine guns, and tanks. So many innocent lives were lost. The Sikh reference library was burnt down and the Darbar Sahib complex was destroyed. The events that occurred in June of 1984 led to further unrest and government-sanctioned mobs, which resulted in thousands of men and women and children being tortured, raped, and murdered based on their identity, leaving a scar on the hearts of Sikhs everywhere. Today, I remember the victims and families who suffered this trauma and stand with the Sikh community in seeking justice, truth, and reconciliation.
The honourable member for London North Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to pay tribute to the members of the London Home Builders Association. I recently attended their President's Industry Gala dinner and heard perspectives on what's needed to address housing affordability and supply. The evening also honored leaders who have made significant contributions to the local and national industry. Speaking about Peter Madsen of CCR Build and Remodel, he's the incoming president. Sue Wastel of Wastel Homes, the president for 2021. Dave Steinmack of Ironstone Building Company, president for 2020. Toby Stoley of Sifton Properties, president for 2019. And Jared Zeifman named CEO in 2021. Certainly want to honor Lois Langdon's contributions, retired as CEO after 25 years of service, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a home is more than just a structure. It's a place where Canadians raise their families and forge unforgettable memories. That's because of home builders, Mr. Speaker. Let's get more quality and affordable homes built quickly, and let's see all levels of government and professional associations like the London Home Builders Association work together to that end. I look forward to working with them. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, in Kelowna Lake Country, June is a busy month filled with recreational activities, heritage, arts, culture, and celebrations. It's Italian Heritage Month, Indigenous History Month, Pride Month, and Filipino Heritage Month. The Lake Country Creekside Theatre and the many organizations in Kelowna's Cultural District have shows, exhibits, and performances for everyone to enjoy. The Kelowna Wine Country Half Marathon includes a scenic run with a beverage and music festival. There's also many sports and recreation activities, including cheering for our very own Kelowna Falcons. We then lead into Canada Day, where celebrations are finally back on this year. The Rotary Club of Lake Country starts the day off at Swalwell Park with a pancake breakfast. Folk Fest is at Prospera Place, including the giant cake cutting. And I'll have a tent set up handing out Canada flag items and kids' coloring sheets. I wish locals and visitors to our beautiful area well, whether volunteering, watching, or participating in activities or celebrations, and I hope to see you at one of our many community events this summer.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Canada Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, I recently met with Nikki Lyons McFarland, Chair of Imprint Youth Association in Fredericton. They shared with me how the pandemic has put a strain on gender-affirming care, and wait lists to access trans healthcare services are growing. Sadly, for many trans and diverse gender Canadians, the pandemic has made it difficult for many to safely access gender-affirming clothing and items as well, especially in rural communities and those living in unsupportive households. Trans healthcare is a health equity issue. Trans and gender diverse Canadians need to know that our healthcare system will serve their needs, advance equality, and will see them for who they are. As anti-trans sentiments and legislation have proliferated around the world in recent months, it's important for Canada to remain an ally to the trans community to ensure they feel safe, heard, and empowered. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Cold Lake Air Show is a not-to-be-missed event of the summer. It brings together the best of civilian aviation, a spectacular show of the Royal Canadian Air Force, and of course, our warm northeastern Alberta hospitality. Over the weekend, you'll have the chance to watch the RCAF snowbirds dance across the sky, the Canadian Armed Forces Skyhawks parachute team perform daring parachute performances. In addition, there will be the CF-18 demo team, the U.S. Air Force F-22 Raptor demo team, and so much more. If you'd rather see aircrafts up close and personal, don't worry. There will be static displays of some of the coolest planes and helicopters. This family-friendly, fun-filled weekend is so much more than just aerial shows and flyovers. There will be bouncy castles, live music, a classic car show, beer gardens, food trucks, just to name a few of the other entertainment options. I would like to officially welcome each and every one of you to come and join us on July 16th and 17th for the 2022 Cold Lake Air Show.
The honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to read an email from one of my constituents. It says, "Hello, Dr. Ellis. I'm writing to you about being a senior and being cold and hungry and do not know where to turn. I've gotten myself into a problem using credit to pay for groceries because there's not enough money after paying bills with old age and the supplement to feed myself. Yesterday it was declined in the grocery store and I am hungry. My mortgage is low, but my power bill is high, as is the phone and cable, which one has to have, especially in the case of emergency. I also have a line of credit and another credit card and put payments on every month, but that leaves me in overdraft after paying bills on the first. I am not understanding how seniors can live these days with the cost of everything, and it's not only me that is cold and hungry. I could try to find work, but then my income supplement would cease. So how would that equate? I still have a mortgage, but I live in a trailer which I could sell, but where would I go? It is insane after working my whole life to be in a position of not being able to feed myself or keep warm. I have no answer. Thank you for listening. Catherine." Sadly, this Liberal government refuses to address the cost of living crisis facing all Canadians.
I rise today to congratulate Cassandra Gillen on being one of the young recipients of this year's Terry Fox Humanitarian Award. Cassandra's passion for social action began at the tender age of 5 when her adolescent cousin fell ill, and she asked for money instead of gifts for her birthday so she could donate to the Montreal Children's Hospital. Today, Cassandra's volunteerism is extensive. She is a Special Olympics coach, co-leader of 2 Girl Guides units, and a member of the organization's National Youth Council and Provincial Quebec Council, and a member of the City of Pointe Claire's Youth Advisory Board. Cassandra's humanitarian spirit extends beyond our borders. She has raised money to help build a school in India, physically helped build a school in Ecuador, raised money to pay for a clean water system in India, and provided meals to school children in Haiti. I am proud to represent in this House a recipient of this prestigious honor that carries the name of one of our greatest national heroes.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Griesbach.
June is National Indigenous History Month, and Canadians must have the courage to put truth before reconciliation as we confront our past. Canada was just 3 years old when it waged its first war in the West at the Red River Métis settlement, a peaceful trading and farming village. Then again in 1885, the government would launch a second war further into the West at Batoche, resulting in the largest mass execution of Indigenous leaders in Canada's history, including that of Louis Riel and Wandering Spirit. During this time, and as a means to clear the plains, the government would install its most insidious policy, that of the residential schools. A policy from this place intended to, quote, kill the Indian in the child, end quote, as stated by then Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald. These attacks on our children never stopped. From the 60s scoop to today's child and family services, lack of clean water and housing, let us not repeat the past.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, today is Véronique Yvon's last day in the National Assembly, where she is the MNA for Joliette. I find her a model politician. She cares deeply about Quebecers and independence. She crosses partisan lines in her work. She is committed to the common good. And in her riding of Joliette, she's always present on the ground and listening to people. Véronique raises up everyone she works with. It's not surprising that her riding office is of such high quality. I've learned a great deal from Véronique. First of all, when we were both activists for the Parti Québécois, and then later when we were both members of Parliament. For all these reasons, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for everything you've done for people in Joliette and Quebec. Thank you for inspiring us and showing us that we can do politics with nobility in favor of the common good without considering personal and partisan interests. As René Lévesque said, I will say to Véronique, until next time.
The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, it's not often you will hear me give praise to the normally silent voices within the Liberal caucus. However, after reading the Hills timepiece this morning by Abbas Rana, and I quote, massive majority of Liberal caucus wants the Prime Minister to drop federal COVID mandates. I wanted to sincerely thank those who spoke out against the Prime Minister's office in an effort to do the right thing. And it is the right thing, Mr. Speaker. I am certain that many Liberal MPs have also heard of the severe hardship the Prime Minister's spite over science, divisive politics on this has created among many of their constituents. We all have. Citizens unable to care for an ailing parent in another part of Canada. Grandparents unable to visit a new member of the family. Being unable to say goodbye to a loved one is cruel. We know this Prime Minister has in the past refused to listen to his caucus and worse, seldom consults with them. On this matter, let us be united. This is about the citizens we represent, and I commend those Liberal MPs who are putting those people ahead of the Prime Minister's divisive political agenda. There are times so that we must unite instead of divide, and I would like to sincerely thank those Liberal MPs who support ending the mandates.
The honourable member for Ottawa West, Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I would like to draw the House's attention to the humanitarian crisis in Haiti. Political instability and violence are making the humanitarian situation worse, and that is having a real impact on the Haitian community in my riding. Canada has committed to funding projects in Haiti to the tune of $70 million in order to improve health services, reduce food insecurity, and strengthen public safety and infrastructure. Canada will be there for the Haitian population as Haitians work for a more democratic, safe, and inclusive future. I'd like to thank the Haitian community for their contributions to Canada and their caring about the citizens of Haiti.
Oral questions, question orale, the Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Today's headline says it all, and I quote, "Massive majority of Liberal caucus wants the Prime Minister to drop federal COVID mandates." The report says that the Liberal member from the Yukon, a doctor and former medical officer of health, has given multiple presentations at Liberal caucus meetings on why the mandates need to be dropped. The member is a real doctor, not a spin doctor, but has the Prime Minister listened to him? Nope. Finally, the incoherence of a policy that is punishing and limiting the rights of Canadians is being realized by Liberal MPs. The Prime Minister won't listen to Canadians, but will he listen to his caucus?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When are the Conservatives going to realize that COVID-19 is not over? The Conservatives are just in denial about the reality of this pandemic. We've seen numerous times the Conservatives trying to immediately remove all federal COVID-19 restrictions. While we're in a much better place today than we were previously, this pandemic's not over, and we must be prepared for any potential future scenarios. Our government will continue to assess the evolving situation at home and globally, monitor data, and adjust border measures as required. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Well, it's becoming clear by the day that these mandates and restrictions have nothing to do with science or evidence-based decision-making. It's all about control. It's about the Prime Minister controlling Canadians from traveling to see their families, controlling businesses recovering from COVID, and controlling Liberal MPs by forcing them to be bit actors in his COVID theatre. Watch them when the cameras come on them, how quickly they put on their masks. There's no coherent reason for these mandates to continue other than control. Will the Prime Minister admit that he's lost the plot and that this is all about controlling Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Vaccines remain an important tool in stopping the spread of COVID-19 and variants, but the Conservatives just can't seem to make up their mind about vaccinations. For example, the member from Yorkton Melville claims that the government has a secret agenda after refusing to get vaccinated, that there's some sort of conspiracy theory. Another Conservative, the member from Niagara West, wants to ban all mRNA vaccines. Those are the same ones that have saved millions of lives worldwide. This type of rhetoric is divisive, it's harmful, and all members of this House should stop trying to spread disinformation, Mr. Speaker. We all have an obligation to share good information and ensure that our constituents have what they need in order to go and get vaccinated.
The Honourable Whip for the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP Liberal government continues to ram through legislation that has criminals jumping for joy. Criminals who steal people's wallets at gunpoint, shoot up the neighborhood, traffic in weapons, or use a gun in their other criminal activities are one step closer to reduced sentences. Now, they claim it's to address overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous peoples in the correction system, but they ignore that these same communities are the ones most often victimized by gun crime. How is it that this government lacks so much compassion for victims and people at risk of violent crime?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, our government is moving forward to make the criminal justice system safer for communities, make it better for victims, make it much more fair and just. What we're doing with Bill C-5, Mr. Speaker, is attacking overrepresentation in the criminal justice system of Black and Indigenous peoples by taking those offenders, Mr. Speaker, who do not pose a risk for public security and making conditional sentence orders available to more crimes, and by reducing around 20 minimum mandatory penalties. Mr. Speaker, we're also raising the sentences for serious crimes.
The Honourable Whip for the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I hear from my constituents that their faith in the justice system is absolutely shaken. Rural communities repeatedly targeted by repeat offenders want serious action. Instead, the government is going to let the people that are beating, robbing, and shooting at them stay out of jail for these and even more serious offenses. This will make things worse. This government's justice reforms fail to address overrepresentation of minority groups in the prison system, and it also fails to enhance public safety. So why doesn't the government do something useful instead of just virtue signaling all the time?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth than what the Honourable Member is saying. Bill C-21, Mr. Speaker, attacks violent crime, attacks gang crime, attacks trafficking in arms, and raises the maximum penalties available for certain sentences. Mr. Speaker, if he's talking about repeat offenders, those offenders do not have access to minimum mandatory penalties. In fact, they go the other way, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, public safety is not going to be negatively affected. In fact, it's going to be enhanced by allowing for serious offenses to be treated seriously and for more flexibility at the other.
The Honourable Opposition House.
Well, since the Liberals like importing American policies so much, in the 1990s, the United States experimented with a tax on boats very similar to the one in this year's Liberal budget, but Congress ended up removing it just 2 years later because it was killing jobs and destroying the industry. It was so bad that the government ended up losing more money from the industry collapse than it generated from revenue. It was a net loss for the Treasury. Will the Liberals admit that there's absolutely no point in having this tax that will cost jobs and kill a sector of our economy that Canadian families enjoy? Or is that their plan? Is that their plan?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it comes as no surprise that this question is coming from the Conservative Party. They voted against increasing taxes for the 1% and decreasing taxes for the middle class. With respect to jobs, Mr. Speaker, that the member raises, Statistics Canada released a report today indicating that May saw 400,000 new jobs created in this country. These are full-time jobs that are well-paying, Mr. Speaker. Since last year, we see an increase in wages of nearly 4%. Canadians are taking home bigger paychecks thanks to the policies that our Liberal government put in place.
The député de Saint-Jean.
We were skeptical when the government announced that they would give aeroplan points to help Ukrainians travel to Canada, and unfortunately, we were right to be skeptical. They promised to help 10,000 people almost 2 months ago, but 2 months later, the government has helped about 500 people out of 10,000 promised. Why has the government broken its commitment to people displaced by war in Ukraine? The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
With great respect to my honourable colleague, nothing could be further from the truth. As of today, there are more than 30,000 Ukrainians who are being provided with safe haven here in Canada. Yes, the federal government has offered charter to nearly 1,000 Ukrainians, and I actually want to thank both Air Canada and the Shapiro Foundation for their extraordinarily generous donation, which is going to start bringing Ukrainians from Europe to Canada as soon as this week. They're going to be starting with 500, but they have secured enough in donations to provide for cost-free transportation for at least 10,000 Ukrainians who are in need of safe refuge. This is something we should be very proud of.
Mr. Speaker, Ukrainians who are fleeing war heard the government tell them that they're going to be welcomed with open arms. 127,000 applied for emergency travel. And what did Canada do for those people on day 107 of the war? They chartered 3 flights, offered 500 plane tickets, and declared itself satisfied. They're not taking this seriously. Is the government going to set up a real air bridge? Or is it confirming that Canada is only opening its arms to people displaced by war who have money? The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, again, with respect to my colleague, I would point out that there are more than 30,000 Ukrainians who've already arrived in Canada. We have not seen this pace of arrivals with people who are fleeing war or persecution in any other initiative that could be comparable in the history of Canada. This is extraordinary to see so many people who have been provided with safe haven so quickly. But it's not enough that we work to get people here. We have to support them when they land. We've arranged to have airport reception services through the Red Cross. We've arranged to give access to settlement services with 550 organizations across Canada. We've established income supports. We've established temporary accommodation supports. We're continuing to do what we can to make sure people get here and succeed after they arrive as well.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
Mr. Speaker, affordability issues are at the top of the mind for all Canadians. Liberals like to compare their track record with other countries, but when it comes to HealthCom, it's an interesting story. Canadians are paying amongst the highest prices for services in all the world, and it could actually get worse with the Rogers-Shaw takeover. Canadians will pay the prices, while Edward Rogers and family will benefit from the takeover, and another billionaire's family will also benefit. It is past time to act. Will the government side with families or with billionaires who want to consolidate power, reduce competition, increase prices for Canadians during the summer, and spend their time on the yachts while Canadians are actually picking money out of their pocketbooks just for an essential service?
The Honourable Minister.
I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Affordability, affordability, affordability. That is what is driving our government policy, Mr. Speaker. And I would say my colleague, the honourable member, knows that very well. Mr. Speaker, my position has been made very, very clear. I would say I would not allow the wholesale transfer of licenses from Shaw to Rogers. The matter is now under review by the Competition Bureau. It's going to be looked at by the CRTC. And I can assure the member that every step of the way we'll make sure that Canadians continue to enjoy the affordability that they deserve, but at the same time that we foster competition across the nation.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, a year ago this government held a National Action Summit on Islamophobia and stakeholders provided clear recommendations. I want to thank the local and national Muslim organizations, including the Youth Coalition Combating Islamophobia from London, who have been fighting in memory of lost loved ones. But they are still waiting for the government to do their job and actually address the root causes of Islamophobia, like bringing legislation to address online hate, radicalization, and violence. Devastated communities like mine are doing the hard work while the government provides only words and no action. Why?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for her question. Canada has seen an alarming increase in racism and hate crime targeting Muslim Canadians. Islamophobia in our country is a real and troubling fact. Our government has taken concrete steps to address Islamophobia. This includes marking January 29th as National Day of Remembrance and Action Against Islamophobia and holding a national summit on Islamophobia this past summer. We will continue to support community organization and work closely with the Muslim community to end Islamophobia once and for all. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Speaker, my constituents have never seen grocery prices so high thanks to Made in Canada inflation. One response to my recent grocery survey read, quote, "I'm a 79-year-old widow on pension. My food and rent have gone sky high," unquote. As well, a recent online Castanet poll found almost 80% of respondents saying rising prices force them to cut back on what they buy. The Liberals can't keep blaming everyone else on food inflation. Is the government going to do anything to help cut the rising price of food? And if not, why?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, there are a number of measures that our government put in place that will help Canadians this year. Canadian families will be receiving up to $7,000 this year in the Canada Child Benefit, and checks are starting to come out in July. Over 3 million Canadian workers are going to benefit from the Canadian Workers Program. But, Mr. Speaker, what we hear from the other side, from the Conservatives, are two policy proposals this week. One is to give a tax break to big oil and gas, and the second is to give a break to Russia and drop the sanctions against Russia. Mr. Speaker, there is no solid, credible economic policy coming from the Conservative Party, and it's disappointing.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Just to correct the record, we are asking for assistance to consumers, so I just want to get that on the record. Statistics Canada reported that 75% of Canadians are being impacted negatively by ever-increasing cost of living. Food costs up, housing costs up, fuel is up. But when this government has the opportunity to provide relief from the pumps, they turn them down. Where is the help from this government for Canadians who are struggling with the dramatic increase in cost of living today?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are proposing to give a tax break to oil and gas companies, not to Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we are providing direct payments to Canadians. Canadians who have trouble finding affordable housing will be getting a direct payment from our government. Canadians who are working at minimum wage will be getting a direct payment from our government. We are helping Canadians directly, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue to do that.
The honourable member for North Okanagan-Shuswap.
Mr. Speaker, sky-high inflation, now at a 31-year high, is having a disproportionate impact on Canadians. The PM doesn't have to buy groceries or fill his own tank, but Canadians on lower incomes are spending a disproportionately higher percentage of their incomes on necessities like bread, milk, and sundries. Gas prices in the North Okanagan-Shuswap are at $2.13 a litre. Some can't afford to drive to work. We know the Prime Minister does not think about monetary policy for Canadians, but do any of the other SPEND-EP Liberals think about it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite cites the PBO report. The PBO report also confirms that inflation is a global phenomenon caused by the war in Ukraine and caused by bottlenecks in supply chains from the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, what we've done is put forward a number of measures in the budget that will help Canadians directly. What the Conservatives have done is to delay the implementation of the budget, delay funding going straight to Canadians in order to help them with the cost of living increase, Mr. Speaker, and it's shameful.
The honourable member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
The Prime Minister keeps saying that the government took on debt during the pandemic so that Canadians wouldn't have to. Well, it turns out it just didn't work. Now the Bank of Canada reports that Canadians' biggest vulnerability is higher household indebtedness. In fact, interest rates are on the rise and people are at risk of losing their homes. And so this is a very important question, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister finally admit that this government's irresponsible spending led to this cost of living crisis? Isn't that right, Mr. Speaker?
That's right. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, a report just came out this week indicating that Canadians and investors have an extremely high confidence in the Bank of Canada and all of our financial institutions. That's certainly not thanks to the member of Carleton's comments or the Conservatives' comments impugning the independence of the Bank of Canada. We will do everything to ensure that our Canadian economy continues to grow. Experts are forecasting that the economy here in Canada will grow at a higher rate than the rest of G7 countries both this year and next year. Our Stats Canada numbers from this morning indicate that unemployment is at its lowest levels historically in this country, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to be focused on our economy and on Canadians.
The honourable member for Langley Aldergrove.
At $2.36 a litre, the price of gasoline in BC's Lower Mainland is the highest in North America. Now, we hear the Minister of Finance say that the price of gasoline is beyond her control, yet we know that it is his government's policy to actually drive up the cost of gasoline. When will they come clean and acknowledge that their policies are hurting ordinary Canadians and fueling our cost of living crisis?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the only proposal from the Conservative Party is to cut taxes on the oil and gas companies themselves, with no guarantee that those tax cuts will be passed on to consumers, Mr. Speaker. What we are doing is providing direct support to Canadians in order so that they can meet the increased cost of living that they're seeing as a result of the war in Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to be focused on Canadians themselves and not big oil.
The honourable member for Desnette, Mississippi, Churchill River.
Mr. Speaker, input costs for farmers have soared. Fertilizer costs have nearly tripled and fuel costs have doubled, all while we face a food security crisis. Yet Liberals intentionally hurt farmers' ability to increase production. A punitive fertilizer reduction policy not based on fact or science and a carbon tax increase, hindering investment in climate-resilient techniques farmers were making long before Liberal ministers were Greenpeace activists.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, has the Minister of Agriculture misunderstood that she is supposed to fight for farmers instead of against?
The
Honourable Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, once again, I want to reassure my colleague. This government has supported farmers the most.
Budget for the Agricultural Department last year of more than $4 billion. It did not happen with the previous government. I can assure you that, because they have cut budget of the business risk management programs and many other programs. While we have increased the budget for business risk management program, we have invested. We are at $1.5 billion investment in agri-environmental programming. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, in a rare move, the Government of Quebec submitted to all parties its proposed amendments to Bill C-13, the Bill on Official Languages. All it's asking these parties to do is to be realistic. Quebec is asking them to recognize the minority situation of the French language in Canada due to the predominant use of English, and consequently that Francophones and Anglophones have different needs. Seems obvious. Will the government amend C-13 so that it reflects reality? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Official Languages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're the first federal government to recognize the decline of French throughout the country, including in Quebec. We know that we have to do more to protect and promote the French language. This is a goal we share with the Government of Quebec. Our government will continue to accept its responsibilities to legislate in its jurisdiction to support the vitality of the French language and the communities that use it. Members at committee will consider these amendments, and they will look at the requests of stakeholders throughout the country, as well as the Government of Quebec. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Not the clearest of answers, Mr. Speaker. But in 2016, the Prime Minister had a flash of insight. He said that Quebec must be French first so that Canada can be bilingual. This is consistent with the amendments to C-13 called for by Quebec. Quebec is asking the federal government to commit to respecting the linguistic development of Quebec as set out in the Charter of the French language. Will the government include Quebec's demands in C-13 to affirm Quebec's uniqueness and ensure respect for the Charter of the French language? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-13 is under review at the Official Languages Committee, and we thank the Government of Quebec for the contribution it's made to the legislative process. Members will have to consider proposed amendments put forward by all stakeholders. I'm optimistic that we will find ways to move forward to get the best legislation possible. So I ask all parties to set aside political games playing and work to ensure that this bill gets adopted as quickly as possible. It's important to communities throughout the entire country. Thank you.
Northumberland, Peterborough South. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are experiencing economic challenges that they haven't seen since Pierre Elliott Trudeau was Prime Minister. They are struggling through a cost of living crisis. Inflation is at 6.8%. Supply chain disruption have Canadians waiting for months for essential items. Gas prices over $2 a litre. A struggling stock market has Canadians' retirement savings disappear. Mr. Speaker, are we experiencing a return to Trudeaunomics, or is this just inflation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite cites a few statistics, and I'll do the same. This morning, Statistics Canada confirmed that wages increased for Canadian workers at the highest rate since 1981 by nearly 4%. Canadians are taking home more money in order to meet the cost of living crisis that they are facing, and our government is supporting vulnerable Canadians. In respect of seniors, for example, we increased our supports for seniors, and it's helped lift over 450,000 seniors out of poverty, Mr. Speaker. We are helping 900,000 seniors right now with our increased supports.
Come on.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Speaker, when questioned about inflation, the government just shrugs its shoulders and says it's part of a global phenomenon. And it's true that some other countries that are running huge deficits are experiencing inflation, but Canada is the only one deliberately making things worse by increasing taxes on consumers. Dropping the carbon tax and GST on fuel would immediately reduce consumer prices, just like prices dropped in Alberta when the provincial government cut its fuel tax. Why won't this government drop these taxes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it's the NDP proposing to increase taxes on oil and gas companies, and it's the Conservative Party that's proposing to cut taxes on oil and gas companies. We're focused on Canadians. We're focused on supporting vulnerable Canadians.
Well, let's take a... As much as I enjoy a go between the two parties, when we're calling somebody a specific liar or what have you is unparliamentary. So if we could just sort of retract that one and then we can move on with question period. Is that okay?
It's okay.
It's okay. Everybody's good? All right. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, we are focused on supporting Canadians directly. That's why this year Canadian families will receive up to $7,000 in the Canada Child Benefit. That's why our new Canadian Workers Program will support over 3 million workers with an increased top-up. Mr. Speaker, we also have direct payments going to Canadians who have trouble finding affordable housing. We are there to support Canadians directly.
The honourable member for Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians need this government to listen. Mark works in rural areas in my riding and needs to get to work. Because of distance and terrain, he can't take a bike, there are no buses or trains, he needs to drive a pickup truck. Mark pays $139 for only half a tank of gas. Mr. Speaker, why is this NDP Liberal government not cancelling the carbon tax increase, suspending the GST on gas to give Mark and all other Canadians a break on fuel?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, this week the Conservatives proposed a number of economic policies. One of them was in order to cancel our price on pollution. A price on pollution, we know, is the most effective way to tackle climate change. The other was to give oil and gas companies a break by dropping the GST. The GST works in this country in the following way. The government taxes the oil and gas companies, and the oil and gas companies pass that tax on to consumers. If we drop the GST on oil and gas companies, there's absolutely no guarantee that Canadian consumers will see any benefit at the pumps. It is a tax reduction on oil and gas companies, pure and simple.
Rachel, have you ever bought anything in the store? Right. Have you ever paid GST?
It's Friday. The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, Edmonton's food bank is facing record demand. At the same time, they're facing a 30% increase in operating costs due to runaway Liberal gas inflation. Now, these are resources being taken directly away from the people they are trying to help. Now, Edmonton charities need help, and the Liberals can help immediately by reducing gas taxes and suspending the carbon tax. So will the Liberals commit to helping those in need, or do they think perhaps the food bank should feed the needy with dishonest Liberal talking points?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we have been there for Canadians throughout the pandemic. We have increased regularly our supports to food banks, and we have helped lift over 400,000 children in poverty out of poverty, Mr. Speaker. Our programs are supporting vulnerable Canadians every day. This year alone, we have ensured that the Canada Child Benefit will increase up to $7,000 for a Canadian family. This is direct support to Canadians when Canadians need it.
Absolutely.
The honourable member for Edmonton Griesbach.
Mr. Speaker, Evangeline Kayakan is a well-known community leader and activist in Edmonton. She's also an undocumented worker. She has given so much of herself to better our community in Edmonton. Yet, she and her Canadian-born 6-year-old daughter are now facing imminent deportation. This is especially traumatizing for her daughter, who has health issues. This is a story of just one in a worrying trend of cruel deportations. Will the minister stop this deportation and help Vanjie and her daughter stay in Canada, her home?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, our immigration system needs to have a compassionate approach. The honourable member knows that we're not at liberty to discuss the specific details of individual case files on the floor of the House of Commons. I'm happy to continue the conversation that we began together about this specific case file. We're aware of it. We're going to continue to look at the details and ensure that the rules are applied fairly, but also with a compassionate lens. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is experiencing a mental health crisis. Every day it is costing lives. The Liberals have promised time and time again to address this crisis, but they've broken their promises. In their election platform, the Liberals promised $4.5 billion to expand mental health services, but there was no sign of this in the budget. They promised a fully funded 3-digit suicide prevention hotline and a suicide prevention strategy, initiatives that received unanimous support right here. Yet again, no funding was given to these commitments in the budget. When will the Liberals follow through on their promises to help people who are struggling?
The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
I thank the member for the question and his ongoing advocacy. Our government has made historic investments in mental health through $5 billion in bilateral agreements with the provinces and territories, which provides now $600 million on an annual basis until 2027. We're engaging with the provinces and territories to inform the development of the new mental health transfer, and we will need the help of all parties and a comprehensive evidence-based plan, including sharing data on indicators and outcomes. We remain fully committed to the additional $4.5 billion over 5 years to support the mental health of Canadians.
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, Northern and Indigenous communities see and experience the harsh consequences of climate change at nearly 3 times the rate of the rest of Canada. From housing to airports to community services, melting permafrost, coastal erosion, and thinning sea ice, these changes negatively impact traditional ways of living. Since 2015, our government's worked together with Northern and Indigenous partners to help fight climate change. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources and the Minister of Northern Affairs please update this House on our government's work with Northern and Indigenous communities to fight climate change and improve quality of life?
Good question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for a wonderful question and for all of his hard work on curbing climate change. Through Northern Affairs, our government has made historic investments of more than $167 million to fund renewable energy, monitor climate change on the land, address the impacts of sea ice change, permafrost melting, flooding, and wildfires. And recently, we announced $300 million to ensure rural, remote, and Indigenous communities can move off diesel and are powered by clean, reliable energy by 2030. We'll keep making those investments and partnering with territories and Indigenous governments to do.
The honourable member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would suggest that the vaccine requirements for being on planes and at workplaces at the moment, I don't think the benefits of these mandates warrant the cost. That statement was from the Liberal member from Thunder Bay, Rainy River, who's also a medical doctor and a member of our health committee. In fact, he's been reported that a massive majority of the Liberal caucus want to see an end to these mandates. So I know the Prime Minister won't listen to Conservatives, but will he take the advice of one of the doctors in his caucus and end these vindictive mandates?
Yep, great question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, our government will continue to make sure that we're putting the health of Canadians first, because nobody wants another wave or more lockdowns due to COVID-19. Let's talk about what some of the Conservatives are saying about vaccination. The member from Yorkton Melville claims that the government has a secret agenda and some kind of conspiracy as she refuses to get vaccinated. Another Conservative, the member from Niagara West, wants to ban all mRNA vaccines, the same ones that have saved millions of lives worldwide. This type of rhetoric is divisive and misleading, and all members of this House should stop trying to spread misinformation. We all have an obligation to stand up for Canadians, ensure they continue to be safe.
The honourable member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What Canadians just witnessed right there, that was just spin doctoring and political science, not medical science. It's been reported that a massive majority of the Liberal caucus want to see an end to these mandates. This week, the member from Milton asked my colleague, a medical doctor who ran a COVID-19 ward in Nova Scotia, to stop asking and talking about mandates. On this side of the House, Conservatives will not be intimidated by members opposite. When will we see an end to these vindictive vaccine mandates?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, back in 2020, the Conservatives claimed that we wouldn't have enough vaccines for all Canadians. But let me be clear, Canada has sufficient supply and will ensure that all eligible Canadians are protected for primary series, for boosters, as well as for pediatrics and other therapeutics. In the face of Omicron and other unfortunate variants, Canada will be able to onboard more sufficient supply of both pediatrics and boosters for the provinces and territories to expedite simultaneous vaccine campaigns. Mr. Speaker, this isn't political science. This is the science of supporting our neighbours.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians have had enough of the Liberals' unscientific vaccine mandates. So too, reportedly, have the vast majority of backbench Liberal MPs, including medical doctors. One of these medical doctors, the Liberal member for Thunder Bay, Atikokan, has even gone on the public record calling for their immediate end. So, when will the Liberals finally listen to experts within their own caucus, medical doctors, and end the mandates?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In order to keep Canadians safe, our government has put in place emergency border measures, which have been very effective in reducing the risk of importation and transmission of COVID-19. While COVID-19 cases in Canada have peaked, other countries are having resurgences of cases, and we need to remain vigilant. That's why we've extended Canada's existing border measures until June 30th, 2022. But I would indicate to the member opposite that they have changed over the period of time since November of 2021 that they have been in place. As we said all along, Mr. Speaker, Canada's border measures will remain flexible and adaptable, guided by science and prudence.
Member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, my office continues to receive on a daily basis emails and letters from my constituents expressing their frustrations with the ongoing reduced hours at land border crossings. Back in April, I asked the Parliamentary Secretary for Public Safety when the hours would go back to normal. Not only did she not provide an answer to that question, she also fully admitted that she wasn't even listening when I asked it. When will the minister actually take this issue seriously and commit to returning border crossing hours back to normal? Or are they just waiting for the House to recess to avoid giving us credit and hearing, "We told you so"?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're working closely with the CBSA to reopen land ports as quickly as possible. We know it impacts Canadians, especially those exporting commercial goods, which is why we've opened 39 land ports. We continue to open all ports that were temporarily closed from COVID. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-les-Basques. Mr. Speaker, after 2 years of not travelling, people are furious about the delays in obtaining their passports. And rightly so, the federal government has allowed delays to accumulate, and it is its duty to correct its mistake. On Tuesday, the Bloc Québécois demanded that passport offices open on weekends and that there be no additional fees for people who travel within 48 hours. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow is Saturday. Will people be able to go to all offices and leave with their passports in hand without any additional fees? And if not, what is the government waiting to do? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for his question and for his advocacy for his constituents. Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadians are travelling again. There's been a significant increase in demand for.
Okay, I'll tell you. There's a really bad sound there. I don't know what was happening. Let's go to the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We know there's unprecedented demand. In fact, over 2 years, Canadians were not renewing their passports, and we have all of those passports being renewed at the same time. Globally, we're seeing long periods of time for these to be processed. In Canada, obviously, we're adding additional resources to meet these demands as quickly as possible to make sure that people can get their passports in a timely way, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Mr. Speaker, Ottawa continues to abandon Francophone veterans. The Auditor General confirmed this in her report last week. Francophones are waiting 2 to 3 months longer for their applications for services. That is 21% longer. I quote the Auditor General. I have come to the real conclusion that the government has not kept its promise to our veterans that it would take care of them. That it would take care of them if they were injured in service. Mr. Speaker, when will this government finally keep its word to Francophones? Thank you. The Honourable Minister for Veteran Affairs.
I appreciate my honourable colleague's question and his concern. We realise more that needs to be done for the Francophone veterans, and that's why we established a dedicated Francophone unit to improve this situation. And we invested $340 million to make sure that we're able to improve the wait times. And in fact, we have improved all wait times, including Francophone veterans. But I realize there is more to do, and I can assure this House and my honourable colleague that we're making sure that happens. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the neoliberal government's philosophy on crime will hurt Canadians more than it helps them. Legislation like Bill C-5 will do nothing to deter criminal activity. It will only promote it. The Prime Minister does not realise that victims of violent crime are overrepresented in black and Indigenous populations. Over the past 7 years, crime has only increased under this government. When will the Minister realise that this type of legislation will do more harm and abolish C-5? The Honourable Minister for Justice. Mr. Speaker, C-5, Bill C-5, targets overrepresented populations in our criminal system. Black and Indigenous populations, notably by giving more flexibility to judges and justices to hand down a sentence, an adequate sentence. Mr. Speaker, we will support victims. We are currently supporting victims, and serious offences will always have serious consequences. We need to tackle the issue of overrepresentation, and that is exactly what we're doing. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, it is urgent that the government wake up. Canadians are being penalised with punitive fines and quarantines for not filling out their ArriveCAN application correctly. Most of them are vaccinated. It's ridiculous. The 14-day quarantine imposed on vaccinated Canadians who do not have the application is now longer than the quarantine imposed on those who actually get COVID-19. For a government that says it follows science, will the Minister finally abandon the ArriveCAN app? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Continues to be an essential and intuitive tool to protect Canadians as we reopen borders and fire up the economy. Through the app, we've streamlined the reopening process, and travel is up 707% from peak pandemic as a result. ArriveCAN takes only a few minutes for vaccinated travelers to complete, and over 99% of air and marine travelers and 94% of land travelers have been compliant and allowed for increased efficiency. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Well, that's ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. The passport saga continues. The government uses the same arguments, but the problems remain the same. Constituents in my riding cannot get Service Canada on the phone, and the lineups are going around the block. Emergency passport applications cannot even be dealt with anymore. Some constituents have even been told to drive 3.5 hours to another riding to try to renew their passport. Is the government's plan to sit on their hands until June 23rd and then magically disappear for their holidays?
House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, after 2 years, unfortunately, there were passports that were not being renewed. It means that 2 years' worth of passports have to be processed in mere months. And, of course, we didn't know exactly when those volumes were going to be hitting. And that's why we've seen worldwide delays in passports, with jurisdictions in every part of the world struggling to keep up with demand. Obviously, we've increased resources and staff and hours, and we're cutting through that volume. We're pleased to say that we're making good progress, and we want to ensure that Canadians will get their passports as soon as possible.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, the National Shipbuilding Strategy contributes billions of dollars annually to the Canadian economy and creates and sustains thousands of jobs from coast to coast to coast. Earlier this week, Quebec's shipyard, Chantier Davy, took another step towards becoming Canada's third official shipyard under the National Shipbuilding Strategy. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Public Services and Procurement tell us how Chantier Davy is contributing to shipbuilding, and what this contract means for Quebec workers and the Quebec economy? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you very much to my friend for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Our government will enter into negotiations with Chantier Davy to conclude a framework agreement to become the third strategic partner in the agreement under the National Shipbuilding Strategy. Once negotiations are complete, Davy Shipyards will build one of the 2 polar icebreakers and 6 icebreakers for the Canadian Coast Guard. This is an amazing job for Quebec and the national capital.
Honourable Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP Liberal defence budget is so nebulous they wouldn't even let the committee vote on it. A former official said there's a $15 billion difference between what's earmarked for defence and what is actually shown. Is the funding just being shown as defence spending so our NATO contributions don't look so bad? And have the funds, the missing billions, gone to the same place as lapsed defence spending into some green slush fund?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are assuring Canadian security and contributing to global security. That's why our government has not only been increasing spending by 70% between 2017 and 2026, following a decade of conservative cuts.
We have a point of order. I believe that interpretation services have been interrupted.
And I'm hoping the translation pops up. So is it an issue of the headphone? So the boom. Parliamentary Secretary can maybe move the boom down a little bit or up.
No, sorry.
Maybe Pippi Prush a little closer.
How about now, Mr. Speaker?
It still sounds a little off. So I'm going to go to the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, and we saw by the Conservatives cuts to critical support for defence year after year. And instead, what we've done is taken an approach of investing in our defence services, investing in our soldiers, making sure after we saw cuts from veterans and shutting veterans' offices that we made sure that that we were there for veterans as well. So we will continue to invest in defence and ensure that Canada is making its appropriate contributions in global security.
Honourable Member for Regina, Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan is the breadbasket of the world and leads the country in the production of wheat, canola, and many other crops. That takes fertilizer, lots of fertilizer. Recently, this government announced its plan to make Canadian farmers ration fertilizer by 30%, causing the price of groceries to skyrocket and leaving many Canadians going hungry. Mr. Speaker, why is this government punishing Canadians who simply want to eat?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're proud that Canada is a very important contributor to food security in the world. And the idea behind reducing the emissions caused by fertilizer does not mean reducing fertilizer. And actually, our producers are engaging significantly in the 4R practices. So best practices, they are applying the fertilizer the right way to reduce emission, to reduce their costs in the same time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Mr. Speaker, in April, in response to questions regarding a possible goat farm at Joycefield, the Parliamentary Secretary stated, "Correctional Service Canada does not intend to do any goat milk production," end quote. And in May, she told the House they are not moving forward with goats, end quote. But on June 2nd, CSC stated that while it currently had no plans for dairy goat operations, it would, quote, reassess at a later date. So why won't the government just admit that they're not going to take the goat farm option off the table?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I will reiterate that there are no goats planned for Correctional Services Canada at this time. There are no contracts for the goat farming. I would ask the honourable member why he is. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, 10 seconds or so.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry. I've been asked about this so many times that I'm losing track of what I said. Currently, Correctional Services is not planning on goat farming, but I would reiterate, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask the honourable member, has he actually visited the prison farms? Has he thought about the fact that when he was in government, his government closed the prison farms. They removed fresh food and dairy from the prisons. Maybe we should start.
Your back was working.
There you go. The Honourable Deputy.
The Honourable Member for Sudbury. Mr. Speaker, our two official languages are part of our country's history and central to our identity as Canadians. The Minister for Official Languages recently launched consultations for the next action plan on official languages. Could the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Official Languages inform us on what our government is doing to ensure that minority Canadians across the country are being listened to, and to also ensure that we have the best game plan to protect our two official languages throughout Canada? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Official Languages. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my colleague for her question and her devotion to her community. We have launched a cross-Canada consultation for our next action plan. We are going to consult communities across Canada to hear their priorities and visions with respect to official languages. Through our current action plan, we have invested unprecedented levels in official language minority communities from coast to coast to coast. and I look forward to our next action plan playing an equally important role in the lives of all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, Ukrainian refugees who have settled in my riding of Nanaimo Ladysmith and across Canada are struggling with resettlement costs. In our communities, people like Yvette have been working tirelessly and spending money out of their own pockets to help Ukrainian families seeking safety. Ukrainians arriving in Canada who've lost everything are unable to access key supports. Why won't this government do the right thing and grant Ukrainian and other refugees permanent status so they have the supports needed?
Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member asks a very important question. We developed in an emergency situation a brand new model of temporary protection because we heard of the vast numbers of people who wanted to come but want to go back home when it's safe to do so. It's really important, though, that we add additional supports that are atypical for people who come as visitors to Canada because these are people who are in need of safe haven. We have established income supports, supports for temporary accommodations. We have fully funded settlement services to ensure that people who are coming as part of this SAFE program are able to benefit from those services. We're going to continue to do what we can, not just to get people here, but to make sure they're supported after they land.
And that's all the time for this Friday's question period. All right, we go to the daily routine of business. The tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 36.8a, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's response to 3 petitions. These returns will be tabled in an electronic format.
Thank you for that. Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers. Rapport de délégation interparlementaire. Présentation de rapport de comité. L'honorable député de Waterloo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I present in both official languages the 10th report of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs in relation to Bill C-14, an act to amend the